I love dragons and death, cause they are fun.
Hey, I'm Tory Torrential. This is Tory Survives Game of Thrones. It's a series where I'm comedically abridging the Song of Fire and Ice and blind reading it and then relaying it to you all. So, to start off, I'm putting on the Professor Tory glasses because there's some kind of cool info dumps in history in here that I'm gonna gloss over real quick. Okay, first off, through a book on dragons that we'll get into in a minute. Apparently, dragon bones are black. They're completely black, and the reason for that is they have a super high iron content, and that makes them as strong as steel and completely impervious to fire, but a little more flexible. That's why that dragon bone bow was such a great gift for Drogo, because apparently like recurve bows made out of dragon bone can outrange almost any other bow. They're like the best, and Dothraki are like, I love this. Also, there was a long history of dragons going back 3,000 years to Aegon the Conqueror. There was one battle where all three of the great dragons were, on the field at the same time. I'm blanking a little bit on the name of the battle, but I'm guessing it's pretty soon after Aegon assumed the throne, because it says the army he was facing was about 10 times the size of his army. Most of the bannermen that he actually had were from the previous king, so like their loyalty was extremely dubious, right? And true to form, as soon as the hosts are set up, they're like about to fight, the one army charges, his army scatters, right? It's like, oh, game over. You're gonna have to change your name to Aegon, the guy with multiple swords in his ass. But then Aegon and his three sisters decide, all right, we're gonna stop playing with these fools, and they get all their dragons. Now there's 3 dragons, and one is named Vhagar. He's the smallest of like the giant dragons. Then there's Meraxes, who's like kind of the middle, sized one. And then there's this dude, I keep thinking Baelor the Blessed, so excuse me on that. But is Balerion. His name is Balerion the Black Dread. And it's also said, like, because I guess Tyrion's really into dragons, like he checked out their skulls in the bottom. We'll talk about that a little more. But these ancient dragons were way bigger, like very the one that starts with Vhagar. These are named after gods, by the way, by like the song singers. Vhagar is big enough where a man and a horse could ride in and just be gone. Meraxes is a little bit bigger than that, and the Black Dread himself is big enough he could eat like a woolly mammoth. So we're talking big scaly boys, right? And all 3 of them are just like, all right, bet, let's teach some people a lesson. And they called it like just the Field of Fire, basically, because I guess these dragons just lit it up. And they like their northerners extra crispy because they just mow down this opposing army completely. And yeah, I'm assuming they don't say anything else, but a lot of other people got real quiet after that, because they're just like, that just happened. Meanwhile, like, the dragons are over there like I like them blackened, like, anyway. So we're gonna get that out of the way, and then we're cutting to Tyrion himself, and he's on his horse and stuff. Another interesting fact about Tyrion is he's actually riding a full horse. He's not on a pony, and that comes up in a little bit too. But he has like a little custom saddle that he has designed and built, and he vastly underestimated the roughness of this trip. Okay, so because like he had seen it on the map and he's like, yeah, it's like 2 weeks, whatever, blah blah blah. But now that they're on the road and he's realizing it gets colder by the day, and he's from the south, so like he packed his fake winter clothes and they are not cutting it. He's just kind of going, you know, the hills are turning to mountains on one side, the blank, you know, prairie turned into this super dense wood. And to make it better, you know, his Uncle Ben told him, he was like, yeah, those are the wolf woods. So every time, like at night, he's just hearing howls like way too close and stuff. I guess Ghost keeps hearing them, but like oddly enough, Ghost ain't saying nothing. He won't howl back. And it's at current, he's kind of not super welcome, you know, like Uncle Ben told him, he's like, you know, we don't have inns at the wall. And he knows he's the queen's brother. Like, they can't refuse him. So he's like, well, I'm small. You'll find me a place, you know? So, like, basically the whole time he's just, like, miserable on his little horse. And he's just sitting there, like, they see me rolling. They hating. Patrolling, trying to catch me riding dirty, trying to catch me riding dirty, trying to catch me riding dirty, trying to catch me riding dirty. What is a road trip? He's in charge of the tunes. But anyway, so they're going, it's creepy, it's too cold, and Benjen actually like trying to be chivalrous or whatever, he offers Tyrion like some of his bear furs, you know, to keep him warm, thinking, you know, Tyrion's gonna be like, oh no, I'll tough it out. And Tyrion's not having it. He's like a little resentful. He knows they don't want him there, so he's like, yeah, I want him. So he has his bear fur, which he's really thankful for because it was freezing cold. And he's like, yeah, Ben can just suffer. You know, if you offer someone like a Tyrion, or if you offer a Lannister something, they take it, is basically what he said in his head. So then, you know, John's he's still romanticizing it and stuff, and like, I'm going up to the wall and I'm gonna be a noble Night's Watchman, you know. And then Yoren shows up. Like, they run into another member of the Watch, and Yoren looks nothing like his Uncle Ben. Like, whereas Uncle Ben's all put together and noble looking and stuff, Yoren is like covered in lice. His stuff's all patchy and whatnot. He's like the Wish version of a Black Knight, you know. And what I feel is kind of like, because Yoren has two guys with him, and he calls them R-worders, you know, trigger warning. But apparently they were forcing themselves on some people, and he says as much, like, as he walks them up. And John is kind of like, what the hell, you know, because like he's like little emo kid John. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna go hang with the awesome goth kids and stuff. And I feel like most people will get this analogy, but then he goes to the goth show, right? And at the goth show, there's like the you know, like bitter old dudes who are like kind of crusty as well, and you realize like only a couple of the goth kids look cool and are nice, you know, and the rest of them are just in various states of disarray, and a lot of them are really creepy and dudes you don't want to leave your drink around. And like, that's kind of, he's like, you know. So I'm thinking because of that, Tyrion kind of realized he's no good at helping set up the camp, and they're like 8 deep. He has 2 dudes with him, so he's letting his men set up his part of the camp, and he's just trying to stay out of the way because, he tried to help and he was just in the way and whatever. So now he just kind of grabs his furs when they stop, goes and finds a place to read with some wine, so he goes up to a creek and he's sitting by this super old tree to block the wind because it's below freezing, and he's sitting there and he's drinking, and it's a book about dragons and dragon lore, and that's where a lot of that info came from, about the dragon bones, and him personally thinking about the dragons in the back. And John walks up, because I guess John's kind of shook. He's just clearing his head or whatever. And he's like, why are you always reading? Because that's been Tyrion's go-to. He just pisses off and he starts reading. Well, now, he's sitting there and he's like, okay, look, the king, he actually says, when you look at me, what do you see? And John is like, I see Tyrion Lannister, and he's actually a little touched, I think, because he's like, you're super polite for a bastard, kind of just as an offhand. And he's like, but no, what most people see is a dwarf. So, King Robert has his giant warhammer. My brother, he has his sword. And me, I have my mind. So while they work on those things, because I know what I can do and what I can't. I had to make a saddle so they wouldn't put me on a pony. And he mentions that he designed it himself. And he's like, so I use books like a whetstone for my mind to keep it sharp. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. R-E-A-D-B-O-O-K. Yeah. And of course that leads John to be like, well, what are you reading? And he's like, oh, I'm reading about dragons. And he kind of goes into the stuff, and he's talking with John. And I'm gonna skip over what I did in exposition, but he also mentions, he's like, yeah, when I got to the castle, I wanted to see the dragon skulls because it's pretty cool, and I had to look all over because King Robert had them removed for his banners, and I found them way down in the basement, and I was checking it out, and that's when he talks about seeing the giant skulls, and he mentions too something kind of curious, but those are 3,000 years old. The last dragon skulls were from about 150 years ago, so fairly recent, and they kind of step down in size and get more and more misshapen until the last 2 dragons, there's a paired set of dragon skulls, and they are misshapen, and they're only about the size of a horse. So I don't know if they inbred them or what happened, but the dragons shrank and their genetics got iffy. But he's also telling them, and he's like, yeah, when I was young, I used to fantasize about having pet dragons because, John was like, well, why? Because dragons don't exist. And Tyrion's like, maybe. And then he kind of tells him, I used to fantasize about having a dragon when I was younger. And John's not entirely sure if he's messing with him or not, And he's like, are you making fun of me? Because John has the wolf and everything. And he's like, no, man, I was twisted, I was ugly. And this is one place I could probably look down at the world back, you know, like if I was on a dragon, you know, and it was so bad, like I'd go down into the basement, I'd set like a giant fire, and I'd pretend it was dragon fire, and like sometimes, you know, I just picture like my dad was in there, or Cersei, you know, and John's kind of looking at him like, this is sketch, you know what I mean? And he's like, oh, come on, dude, you know, like, you're a bastard. And John's like, I do not know. I have never done this. You know, like, and he's like, right, because I'm sure your life was perfect. And, you know, Rob was super nice because why not? He's getting Winterfell anyway. And I'm sure Caitlyn treated you exactly like one of her own kids. And, you know, I'm sure your dad just had a great reason why he sent you off to the Night's Watch. And this kind of triggers John. I'm thinking partly because he's starting to realize, you know, and he's like, stop it, you know? And Tyrion doesn't, you know, more or less. He kind of pushes a little bit more, and he's like, do you like how your new brothers look? You know, because John's like, the Night's Watch is noble sacrifice. Like, he's holding on to that image in his head. And he's like, yeah, have you noticed who your new brothers are? Like, you know, meaning Yoren and the other guys. And he starts going, he's like, that's where they lock up all of the misfits of the realm. Like, you know, all the debtors, all the thieves, all the R-worders, you know, everything gets thrown up to the Night's Watch. You're gonna be up there with those people. You're gonna be up on a wall looking for Snarks and Grumpkins and all the other imaginary monsters that your you know, milkmaids and stuff have told you about. And luckily, you know, they aren't real, so you're just gonna be on the wall freezing your boys off. But even that's gonna be okay because you can't make kids anymore because you took your freaking oath, right? And John has had it at this point. Like, reality's just hitting him too hard, and he's like, knock it off, stop it, you know? And he balls up his fist, like he's like, you know, because apparently he's about to flex on this imp or something. I don't think so. He's just mad, you know? And Tyrion kind of realizes, like, he got ahead of himself, and he is forcing this harsh reality right onto John. So he starts feeling guilty, and John's like, you know, like, he's just sitting there like, that's how I picture him, like emo kid, you know. He's like, and Tyrion's like, might have went too far, right? So he takes a step to, like, just be like, you know, hey, it ain't like that, you know, and like pat him on the shoulder or whatever. But what he forgot about is John has a giant freaking wolf that is very protective of John. So instead of, like, you know, he gets like reverse Calvin and Hobbes in the back, just poof, right? Because Ghost just beams him in the back as soon as he starts moving towards John after John got mad and was like, stop it. So, like, Ghost just, I think maybe John actually was pretty mad at Tyrion, but Ghost reads the room right or wrong, but he decides to handle it like Ghost and just bam, eat dirt, right? And he hits hard. Like, apparently he wrenches his back. He's got dirt and blood in his mouth and like dried leaves, and Ghost just smooth as ever, just boom, right in between him and John. And again, he doesn't make a word. He doesn't growl, nothing. He just bares his teeth at him like, I'm a wolf, you know? And Tyrion knows, like he manages to grab a root and get up on his butt and stuff, but he doesn't even want to risk like standing up. So he's just like, help me, you know, like, to John. And John's still a little bit in his feels and kind of petty, so he's like, ask me nicely, you know, like trying to, I guess, give him shit back. And Tyrion it stings Tyrion a little bit because, you know, he gets humiliated a lot. But this time, at least, he's like, okay, maybe I deserve this one. You know what I mean? Because I get the sense he does feel bad that, like, he just really hurt Jon's feelings and potentially ruined the entire rest of the trip. So he's like, oh, would you please help me? Or whatever he said. Like, he capitulates to Jon. And then Jon, you know, tells Ghost, he's like, sit. And he walks over. And I think Jon feels kind of bad, too. He was just up in his feels because he's a teenager and stuff. Because he immediately pulls up Tyrion. And then, without being asked or anything, like, you know, he's grabbing his fur. And he's grabbing the book that got knocked. And, you know, he's grabbing his wine. And he's, like, handing them to him. And then on top of that, Tyrion's like, why did your wolf attack me, man? And he's like, oh, he must have thought you were a grumpkin, like, still, you know, with the mockery. And Tyrion, instead of, like, getting ticked off at that, he pauses and then he, like, snorts out of his nose, you know? And he's like, all right, I guess I do look like a grumpkin. But if he does that to grumpkins, like, what the hell does he do to snarks? And Jon is like, oh, don't even ask about the snarks, you know? And they kind of whatever. And that's when he gets him his wine, and he takes a hit of the wine. So he's feeling like a little bit better. And he hands it to Jon, and Jon knows better than to trust Tyrion's wine. So he just takes like a real cautious kind of sip and gives it back, and he's like, okay, we probably should get back before they call the bannermen on us, you know? And they end up heading back to the camp. And as soon as they walk into camp, you know, Uncle Benjen or whatever, he's like, where have you been, dude? Like, I was worried and stuff, you know, see, I thought you were going to run away because you saw the reality, you know? And Tyrion's just like, oh, we had to deal with a grumpkin, you know? And, like, they kind of share their little inside joke. Uncle Ben just looks at Yoren, and he's like, what the fuck? Yeah, but Yoren's over there just salty as ever, you know, with his hard face, and, like, because he's a hard dude, like, just salty dog, right? And he is cutting up, like, some squirrel that they got a hold of because Tyrion's men are making a stew, you know? And, like, he walks over, and, you know, the guy minding the stew just hands him the ladle. He takes, like, a little sip, and he's like, more pepper, you know? And they're more or less kind of settling in for the night. And they dump the squirrel in, and it thickens the stew up, you know, all right. And Tyrion, I guess he's in a mood, so he starts passing out his summer wine that he's been sipping on, and everybody gets a little bit looser. Like, it mentions even Yoren mellows out some, so that summer wine is definitely hitting pretty hard. And everybody's just like, all right, bet, let's go to bed. And Jon pulls the first watch, you know, for the night. So everybody's going to bed. Tyrion's walking to his tent. When he looks back, though, Jon is just standing there, and he's just staring directly into the fire. And, like, you know, Tyrion kind of, like, has, like, this sad smile, you know, like, kind of like he identifies, but he's also sorry. And you know, because Jon, like, I think the reality is just hitting him, and what his family let him do, basically. One thing I did forget to mention is after all of that, and he mentions, you know, like, you're going to be around thieves, and you're basically put to pasture, and all of that, Jon was just like, well, it is what it is. I took an oath. And, you know, Tyrion actually gives him props. He's like, you didn't run away from that. Like, you just faced a hard truth. That takes a lot of strength. And so I think they might have bonded a little bit more because Jon was just like, well, you know, I guess it is what it is. Like, he didn't run from it. But that, you know, fades out with him staring at the fire. So that was chapter 13, Tyrion 2. I am Tory Torrential. You hopefully were amused, and I love you. Thanks for watching my show. Like and subscribe.